abandoned in labor until millionaire stranger walked in and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." The fluorescent lights in room 314 buzzed with an electric hum that seemed to mock the silence. Naomi Clark gripped the hospital bed rail so tightly her knuckles had gone white, her breathing coming in short, desperate gasps as another contraction ripped through her body like lightning. The antiseptic smell of the hospital mixed with her own fear-soaked sweat, creating an atmosphere so thick with abandonment it felt suffocating. Her phone lay on the bedside table, screen cracked from where she'd dropped it after reading Bobby's text for the 10th time. "Can't do this. Sorry." 3 words. 2 years of her life, 9 months of pregnancy, and the man who'd sworn he loved her had reduced their relationship to 3 cold, cowardly words sent from the parking lot as she labored alone. "It's just you and me now, baby girl," Naomi whispered through gritted teeth, one trembling hand moving to her swollen belly. "Just you and me against the world." But even as she spoke those brave words, terror clawed at her chest. How was she going to do this alone? The marketing coordinator's salary that barely covered her rent, the sister who was struggling with her own problems, the parents who'd made it clear that having a baby out of wedlock was a disappointment they couldn't support. Every person she'd ever trusted had either left or let her down, and now here she was, about to bring a precious life into a world where she had no one. Another contraction hit, this one so powerful it stole her breath and brought tears streaming down her face. Not from the physical pain, though that was excruciating, but from the crushing weight of being utterly, completely alone in the most important moment of her life. That's when the door opened. Naomi looked up through her tears, expecting to see Javier Morales, the kind labor nurse who'd been checking on her every 20 minutes with worried eyes. Instead, she found herself staring at a man she'd never seen before. Tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his expensive charcoal suit, he had the kind of presence that seemed to change the very air in the room. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes were the deepest green she'd ever seen, and right now they were filled with something that made her heart skip, despite the pain racking her body. Not pity, not the awkward discomfort she'd grown used to seeing when people realized she was alone. This was something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he'd been searching for her his whole life and had finally found her in this sterile hospital room at her most vulnerable moment. "Oh," he said softly, his voice carrying the faintest hint of an Irish accent that made her think of whiskey and warmth. "I'm sorry, I think I got off on the wrong floor. I was looking for—" But his words trailed off as their eyes met and held, and Naomi felt something shift in the universe around them. Time seemed to stop. The pain in her body receded to a distant ache as she found herself drowning in those impossible green eyes. She should tell him to leave, should explain that he'd made a mistake. But something about his presence made the terrifying loneliness that had been consuming her start to crack around the edges. "Are you—" he started, then stopped, his gaze taking in her obvious distress, the empty chair beside her bed, the phone with its cruel message still glowing on the screen. Understanding dawned across his handsome features, followed immediately by something that looked like barely contained fury. "Are you alone?" The question was asked so gently, with such careful concern, that it broke something inside Naomi's chest. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to trust her voice. Without hesitation, the stranger stepped into the room and let the door close behind him. He moved with the kind of confident grace that spoke of a man accustomed to taking charge, but there was nothing aggressive about his approach. If anything, he seemed to be holding himself back, as if every instinct in his body was screaming at him to do something, but he was forcing himself to be careful. "That's not right," he said, and there was steel beneath the gentleness in his voice. "No one should go through this alone." Another contraction began building, and Naomi's breathing became labored again. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the pain the way the birthing class instructor had taught her back when she'd naively believed Bobby would be there to help her remember the techniques. "Breathe with me." The stranger's voice came from much closer now, and when she opened her eyes, she found him standing beside her bed. "In through your nose, hold it, Now out through your mouth. That's it. You're doing beautifully." His voice was like an anchor in the storm of pain and fear, something solid to hold on to when everything else in her world was spinning out of control. Without thinking, she reached out, and he immediately took her hand in both of his. His skin was warm and slightly calloused, the hands of a man who'd worked for what he had, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with the contraction. "What's your name?" he asked as the pain began to ebb. "Naomi," she managed, still clinging to his hand like a lifeline. "Naomi Clark." "I'm Patrick O'Connor," he said, and something about the way he said it made her think she should recognize the name. "And I want you to know something, Naomi Clark. You're not alone anymore. I'm here." The simple declaration hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had made her a promise and actually kept it? When had anyone ever looked at her the way Patrick was looking at her now, as if she was something precious that needed protecting? "You don't even know me," she whispered, but even as she said it, part of her was desperate to believe him. "Then we'll fix that," he said with a small smile that transformed his entire face. "But right now, you need to focus on bringing your daughter into the world safely. Everything else, we'll figure out together." Together. The word hung in the air between them like a promise, and for the first time since Bobby Edwards had walked out of her life, Naomi felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone after all. Dr. Chloe Davies chose that moment to bustle into the room, her no-nonsense demeanor faltering slightly when she spotted Patrick. "I'm sorry, sir, but visiting hours are over, and only family members are allowed in the delivery room." Patrick's grip on Naomi's hand tightened protectively, and she found herself holding on just as fiercely. The thought of him leaving now, of being abandoned again, sent panic shooting through her chest. "I'm her partner," Patrick said smoothly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that people instinctively responded to. "And I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Davies looked between them with sharp, assessing eyes. She'd been delivering babies for 15 years and had seen every kind of family drama imaginable, but something about the way this man was looking at her patient made her pause. There was a fierce protectiveness there, a tenderness that couldn't be faked. "Are you the father?" she asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Naomi held her breath, waiting for Patrick to make his excuses and leave like everyone else had. Instead, he looked down at her with those incredible green eyes and said, "I'm exactly where I need to be." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and something about the careful way he'd phrased it made Dr. Davies nod curtly. "Very well, but if you're staying, you need to scrub in properly. Javier will show you where." As if summoned by his name, Javier Morales appeared in the doorway with his characteristic easy smile. The labor nurse had been working at the hospital for 8 years and prided himself on reading people quickly, but this situation had him intrigued. The woman had been alone when he'd first checked on her, abandoned by some coward who'd left her to face labor by herself. Now this man had appeared out of nowhere and was looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. "Senor, if you'll come with me, we'll get you ready," Javier said, his accented English warm with approval. He'd seen too many women go through this alone, and he wasn't about to question a miracle when it walked through the door. Patrick started to release Naomi's hand, but she held on desperately. "Please don't leave," she whispered, hating how broken she sounded but unable to stop herself. He brought their joined hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender and intimate that it stole her breath. "I'll be right back," he promised. 2 minutes, and then I'm not leaving your side again." And somehow, impossibly, Naomi believed him. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. True to his word, Patrick returned in exactly 2 minutes, now dressed in surgical scrubs that somehow made him look even more handsome. The mint green brought out the color of his eyes, and the way the fabric stretched across his broad chest made Naomi's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with labor pains. "How are we doing?" he asked, immediately reclaiming his position beside her bed and taking her hand again. "Better now," she admitted, and meant it. Something about his presence made the sterile hospital room feel less cold, less frightening, made her feel less alone. Dr. Davies began her examination, and Patrick proved to be exactly the birth partner Naomi had dreamed Bobby would be, but never was. When the contractions intensified, he coached her breathing with steady, encouraging words. When she needed ice chips, he was there with them before she could ask. When she gripped his hand so tightly she was sure she was cutting off his circulation, he never once complained or pulled away. "You're incredible," he murmured during a brief lull between contractions, using a cool washcloth to gently wipe the sweat from her forehead. "Absolutely incredible." "I don't feel incredible," Naomi panted. "I feel like I'm being torn apart." "You're bringing life into the world," Patrick said with such reverence in his voice that it made her eyes fill with tears again. There's nothing more incredible than that. It was such a simple thing to say, but the way he said it, with such genuine awe and respect, made Naomi see herself differently. Not as the abandoned, struggling single mother she'd felt like all day, but as a woman doing something miraculous, something powerful. "I can see the head," Dr. Davies announced suddenly. "Naomi, on the next contraction, I need you to push. Can you do that for me?" Fear spiked through Naomi's chest. This was it. This was really happening. In a few minutes, she was going to be responsible for a tiny human being, and she was still going to be doing it alone because, no matter how kind Patrick was being, he was still a stranger who would disappear from her life as soon as this was over. As if he could read her thoughts, Patrick leaned down close to her ear. "Hey," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "Look at me." She turned her head and found herself drowning in those green eyes again. "You've got this," he said with such absolute conviction that she almost believed him. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, and you're about to meet your daughter. I'm right here with you, and I'm not going anywhere. I promise." The contraction hit like a freight train, and Naomi bore down with everything she had, Patrick's voice guiding her through it, his hand anchoring her to something solid and real in a world that had suddenly become nothing but sensation and effort and overwhelming intensity. "Again," Dr. Davies called. "One more big push." Naomi gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed with everything in her, Patrick's encouragement filling her ears, his presence filling the empty spaces in her heart that had been aching for so long. And then, suddenly, there was a new sound in the room, a thin, reedy cry that was the most beautiful thing Naomi had ever heard. "It's a girl," Dr. Davies announced with a smile, "a beautiful, healthy baby girl." Naomi collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but euphoric, tears streaming down her face as she watched the doctor clean off her daughter. Her daughter. She had a daughter. "She's perfect," Patrick breathed beside her, and when Naomi looked at him, she was startled to see that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Absolutely perfect." Dr. Davies placed the baby on Naomi's chest and the world disappeared. Nothing existed except this tiny, perfect human being who was looking up at her with dark, unfocused eyes that would probably change color in the weeks to come. Her daughter had a cap of dark hair and the most beautiful little face Naomi had ever seen, and when she made a small, snuffling sound, Naomi's heart expanded so much she was sure it would burst. "Hello, baby girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm your mama." "What are you going to call her?" Patrick asked softly. "Emma," Naomi said without hesitation. It was the name she'd chosen months ago, back when she'd still believed Bobby would be there to help her make these decisions. "Emma Rose Clark." "Emma Rose," Patrick repeated, and something about the way he said it, with such tenderness and respect, made it sound like a benediction. "It's beautiful. She's beautiful." As if she recognized his voice, Emma turned her tiny head toward Patrick, and Naomi watched in amazement as this man, who'd been a stranger less than 2 hours ago, reached out with one gentle finger to stroke her daughter's cheek. "Hello, little princess," he murmured. "Welcome to the world." And watching them together, This man who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known she was making, and the daughter who was already the center of her universe, Naomi felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. In that moment, as Patrick gently kissed her forehead and whispered, "You did it, Naomi. You're incredible," she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this story was going to have a different ending than all the others. Maybe this time, someone really was going to stay. Chapter 2. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, forms to sign, and the overwhelming reality of suddenly being responsible for another human being. Patrick never left Naomi's side, even when the nurses came to take Emma for her newborn tests and vaccinations. He sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, as if it were a throne, watching Naomi with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead made her feel cherished. As the afternoon sunlight began to fade outside her recovery room window, Naomi finally found the courage to voice the question that had been haunting her since Patrick first walked into her life. "You should go," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done more than enough, and I'm sure you have a life to get back to. Family, work. Someone must be wondering where you are." Patrick looked at her with such surprise that she might have suggested he sprout wings and fly around the room. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, leaning forward in his chair. "Not unless you tell me you don't want me here." "It's not that," Naomi said quickly, because the truth was she desperately wanted him to stay. She just couldn't understand why he would want to. I don't understand why you're doing this. You don't even know me. You don't owe me anything." Patrick was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying her face as if he was trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he moved from the chair to sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the IV line in her arm. "When I was 7 years old," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that spoke of old pain carefully contained, "my mother dropped me off at a children's home in Dublin and told me she'd be back in a few days. She said she just needed time to figure things out, to get her life together." He paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "She never came back." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "Patrick." "I spent the next 11 years in the system," he continued, his gaze fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. "Foster homes, group facilities, temporary placements with relatives who didn't want the burden of another mouth to feed. Some families were kind, some were not. But the thing that stayed with me, the thing that shaped everything about who I became, was the memory of sitting in that first placement, watching the door, and believing that if I was just good enough, just quiet enough, just perfect enough, someone would come back for me." His voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "No one ever did. And today when I got off on the wrong floor and heard crying from this room, when I walked in and saw you there, alone and scared and fighting through something that no one should have to face by themselves." He finally looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "I couldn't walk away. I couldn't be another person who left you when you needed someone most." Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks as she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "What happened to you, what your mother did, it wasn't okay. You deserved better." "I know that now," Patrick said, his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles. "It took me years of therapy and building a business empire to prove to myself that I was worth something. But seeing you today, seeing your strength and your courage in that delivery room, it reminded me that sometimes the universe puts people in our path exactly when we need them most." "Is that what you think this is?" Naomi asked softly, studying his handsome face in the growing twilight. "The universe?" Patrick's smile was small but genuine, transforming his features with warmth. "I think I was supposed to get off on the wrong floor today. I think I was supposed to walk into your room. And I think Emma Rose was supposed to have more than just one person in her corner from day one." Before Naomi could respond, the door opened and Javier entered with Emma in his arms, the baby swaddled in a soft pink blanket and wearing a tiny knit cap that made her look like the most precious thing in the world. Someone wants her mama, Javier said with his characteristic warm smile, carefully transferring Emma to Naomi's arms. And she passed all her tests with flying colors, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a perfect set of lungs that she demonstrated quite enthusiastically during her blood draw. As if to prove his point, Emma chose that moment to let out a lusty cry that filled the room. Naomi tried to soothe her, rocking gently and making soft shushing sounds, but Emma was clearly not interested in being placated. She's probably hungry, Javier suggested kindly. I can help you with feeding if you'd like, Senora Clark. But before Naomi could respond, Patrick stood up and held out his hands with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. May I? He asked gently. Naomi hesitated for just a moment, then carefully transferred Emma to Patrick's arms. She watched in amazement as he cradled the baby with natural ease, supporting her head perfectly and holding her close to his chest in a way that spoke of instinct rather than experience. Hey there, little princess, he murmured in that soft voice that had become her anchor. What's all the fuss about? Your mama's right here and she's been through quite enough for one day. How about we give her a few minutes to rest? Incredibly, Emma's cries began to quiet. She blinked up at Patrick with those unfocused newborn eyes, and Naomi could swear she saw recognition there, as if Emma somehow knew this man was safe, was someone who would protect her. Javier watched the interaction with professional interest and personal warmth. You're a natural, he observed with approval. You have other children, senor? No, Patrick said quietly, never taking his eyes off Emma's face. But I've always wanted to be a father. Something in the way he said it, with such longing and tenderness, made Naomi's heart clench. Here was a man who'd been abandoned as a child, who'd built his entire life around proving his worth, and he was looking at her daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. Well, Javier said with a knowing smile that had witnessed countless variations of love in his years at the hospital. It looks like you're getting some excellent practice. I'll leave you three to get acquainted. After he left, Patrick continued to hold Emma, walking slowly around the small room and humming under his breath. It was an old Irish lullaby, Naomi realized, probably something he'd heard in his earliest years before his world had fallen apart. The melody was haunting and beautiful, and Emma seemed entranced by the sound. My sister is going to want to meet her, Naomi said softly, pulling out her phone to send Jasmine a text with a photo of Emma sleeping peacefully in Patrick's arms. She's been worried sick since I went into labor this morning. What about the rest of your family? Patrick asked carefully, his voice neutral but his eyes watchful. Naomi's expression tightened, and she set her phone aside with more force than necessary. My parents made their feelings about my pregnancy pretty clear. They think I'm ruining my life by having a baby out of wedlock, bringing shame on the family name. She laughed bitterly, but there was hurt beneath the anger. They might be right. I'm 28 years old, single, barely making ends meet, and now I have a baby to support. They're not right, Patrick said with such conviction that she looked up in surprise. You're not ruining anything. You're beginning something beautiful. You're creating a family. Am I? Naomi asked, suddenly feeling overwhelmed again by the magnitude of what lay ahead. Patrick, I work in marketing for a small firm downtown. I barely make enough to cover my rent on a good month, and now I have a baby to support. I don't have a nursery set up. I don't have a car seat. I don't even have enough diapers to last a week. How am I supposed to take care of her properly? Patrick stopped walking and turned to face her fully, Emma still peaceful in his arms, her tiny fist curled around his finger. What if I told you that you don't have to figure it out alone? What do you mean? Come home with me, Patrick said simply, as if he was offering something as ordinary as a cup of coffee. Both of you. I have a house in Pacific Heights with more rooms than I know what to do with. You can recover properly. Emma can have everything she needs, and you can take the time to figure out what comes next without worrying about money or logistics, or whether you can afford formula. Naomi stared at him in shock, her mind reeling. Patrick, I can't. That's too much. You don't owe me anything. We barely know each other. This isn't about owing, Patrick said firmly, moving closer until he was standing right beside her. Bed. This is about wanting to help, about wanting to be part of something good for the first time in my life. about wanting to give Emma the kind of start I never had. You don't even know me, Naomi protested weakly, but even as she said it, she was imagining what it would be like to not worry about rent, about child care, about whether she could afford to take maternity leave. Then we'll get to know each other, Patrick said with the same confidence he'd shown in the delivery room. We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations beyond letting me help you both get on your feet. Just let me do this. Let me be useful. Naomi looked at him holding her daughter, this man who'd appeared out of nowhere, and turned what should have been the worst day of her life into something that felt like the beginning of everything she'd ever wanted but never dared to hope for. He was offering her a lifeline, a chance to catch her breath and figure out how to be a mother without the crushing weight of financial stress and isolation. It was too good to be true. It had to be. People like Patrick O'Connor didn't just rescue struggling single mothers out of the goodness of their hearts. There had to be a catch, a hidden agenda, something that would make this fairy tale turn into a nightmare. But looking into his eyes, seeing the way he held Emma like she was made of spun glass and precious dreams, Naomi couldn't find any trace of deception, only sincerity and a loneliness that matched her own, and something that looked like hope. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "Why would you do this for us? What's in it for you?" Patrick was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to Emma's sleeping face. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft she had to strain to hear him. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in the world," he said, "and I know what it's like to wish someone, anyone, would choose to stay. Today, I want to be the person who stays." The words hit Naomi like a physical blow, striking right at the heart of every fear and hope she'd been carrying. Here was a man who understood abandonment because he'd lived it, who knew the particular ache of being left behind by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. "Okay," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Patrick's head shot up, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Okay?" "Okay," Naomi repeated, more firmly this time, decision crystallizing in her chest. "We'll come home with you, just until I figure things out, until I can get back on my feet." The smile that spread across Patrick's face was like sunrise after the longest night, warm and bright and full of promise. He carefully transferred Emma back to Naomi's arms, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead. "Welcome to the family, little princess," he murmured, and then, to Naomi's shock and wonder, he pressed an equally gentle kiss to her forehead. His lips were warm and soft against her skin, and the gesture was so tender, so full of reverence, that it made her eyes fill with tears. "Both of you," he whispered against her skin. "Welcome to the family." As his lips touched her forehead, gentle and reverent and infinitely caring, Naomi felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked away and guarded for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Pure, terrifying, beautiful hope. And for the first time since Bobby Edwards had walked out of her life, Naomi began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this story was going to have a different ending than all the others. Maybe this time, someone really was going to stay. Maybe this time, she was going to be more than just enough. Maybe this time, she was going to be cherished. Chapter 3. The first week at Patrick's Pacific Heights mansion passed in a haze of wonder and adjustment that Naomi could never have imagined. Instead of struggling alone in her cramped studio apartment, counting every dollar and wondering how she'd manage Emma's needs, she found herself surrounded by luxury and genuine care from people who seemed invested in their well-being. Patrick was a revelation with Emma, something that continued to amaze Naomi every single day. He could calm the baby's cries with a few soft words in that lilting Irish accent, and he never seemed to mind the 3 a.m. feedings or the endless cycle of bottles and burp cloths that had become their routine. More than that, he approached fatherhood with the kind of reverent determination that spoke of a man who'd waited his whole life for this opportunity. "You don't have to do this," Naomi told him one evening as he took Emma from her arms without being asked, settling into the nursery's plush rocking chair to give the baby her bedtime bottle. The room he'd had prepared was beyond anything she could have dreamed. Sage green walls, the finest linens, and a view of San Francisco Bay that looked like something from a magazine. "She's not your responsibility, Patrick." Patrick looked up at her with those impossibly green eyes, Emma cradled against his chest like she'd been born to be there. "Yes, she is," he said simply, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "The moment I chose to stay in that hospital room, she became my responsibility. You both did." The unwavering certainty in his voice made Naomi's chest tighten with emotions she wasn't ready to name. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper too, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of love and that terrified her more than she cared to admit. It was Lucy O'Connor who first noticed the growing tension between them. Patrick's sister had arrived the day after they'd come home from the hospital, and she'd been a constant, welcome presence ever since. Lucy was warm where Naomi had expected coldness, genuine where she'd braced for judgment, and she had Patrick's same green eyes and easy laugh. "You know he's falling for you, right?" Lucy said one sunny afternoon as they sat in the mansion's immaculate garden while Emma napped peacefully in her designer stroller. Naomi nearly choked on her tea, the delicate china cup rattling against its saucer. "What?" "No, he's being kind, helping out someone in need." Lucy laughed, a sound so much like Patrick's that it made Naomi's heart ache with familiarity. "Honey, I've known my brother for 34 years. I've seen him with women before, beautiful, successful women from his own social circle, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Like you're something precious he's afraid might disappear if he blinks too hard." "It's not like that," Naomi protested, but even as she said it, she thought about the way Patrick's hand lingered when he passed. Emma, to her, the way his eyes followed her movements around the house, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs before she even realized she had them. We're figuring things out, taking it day by day." "Are you?" Lucy asked gently, setting down her own teacup and studying Naomi's face with the kind of perception that ran in the O'Connor family. "And more importantly, how do you feel about him?" That was the question Naomi had been avoiding for days, the one that kept her awake at night staring at the ceiling of her beautiful guest room. How did she feel about Patrick O'Connor? He was everything she'd never dared to dream of. Kind, generous, devastatingly handsome, and completely devoted to both her and Emma. But he was also wealthy beyond her comprehension, moving in circles she'd never be part of, and she couldn't shake the feeling that eventually he'd realize what a mistake he'd made. "It doesn't matter how I feel," Naomi said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "This is temporary, Lucy. He's helping us get on our feet, and then Emma and I will go back to our real lives. I can't let myself forget that." "What if he doesn't want you to go?" Lucy asked quietly. Before Naomi could answer, they heard Emma beginning to fuss from her stroller, those soft little sounds that meant she'd be demanding her bottle soon. As Naomi reached for her daughter, she noticed Patrick's sleek black sedan pulling up the circular driveway. He'd been at his downtown office all day, handling what he'd described as a few pressing acquisitions, and Naomi had found herself missing his presence more than she cared to admit. "Daddy's home," Lucy said with a knowing smile, and something about the word daddy made Naomi's pulse quicken with possibilities she wasn't ready to examine. Patrick emerged from the car looking slightly harried, his usually perfect dark hair mussed and his expensive tie loosened at the throat. But the moment he spotted them in the garden, his entire demeanor transformed. His face lit up with genuine joy, and he practically jogged over to where they were sitting, his expensive Italian shoes forgotten on the perfectly manicured grass. "How are my girls?" he asked, immediately reaching for Emma with the kind of eager tenderness that never failed to make Naomi's heart skip. The baby settled into his arms with the contentment that spoke of complete trust and recognition. "My girls." The casual possessiveness in his voice sent warmth flooding through Naomi's chest, even as her rational mind tried to remind her not to read too much into it. Emma was an angel all day, Naomi reported, watching the way Patrick's face softened as he looked down at the baby. She slept for 3 straight hours this afternoon, which I'm pretty sure qualifies as a minor miracle. "And how was Mama?" Patrick asked, his attention shifting to Naomi with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. His eyes swept over her face with the kind of careful attention that suggested he was cataloging every detail, looking for signs of fatigue or stress. "Mama was fine," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the way her heart was racing under his scrutiny. "Just fine?" Patrick asked, settling into the wrought iron chair beside her, with Emma still in his arms. "You look beautiful today, Naomi. That color brings out your eyes." The compliment was delivered so naturally, with such obvious sincerity, that Naomi felt herself blushing like a teenager. She was wearing a simple blue sundress that Lucy had insisted on buying for her during a shopping trip earlier in the week, claiming that new mothers deserved to feel beautiful and confident. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly very aware of how close Patrick was sitting, how the evening sunlight caught the gold flecks in his green eyes, how good he smelled, like expensive cologne layered over something uniquely masculine that made her want to lean closer and breathe him in. "I have something for you," Patrick said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket with his free hand while continuing to hold Emma with practiced ease. "Patrick, you don't need to keep buying us things," Naomi protested automatically, but he was already pulling out a small wrapped box tied with ivory ribbon. "It's not for Emma this time," he said with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "It's just for you. I saw it today and, well, just open it." With trembling fingers, Naomi unwrapped the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a mother and child. It was simple but elegant, the kind of jewelry that spoke of thoughtfulness rather than mere expense, and it was so perfectly suited to her taste that it brought tears to her eyes. "Patrick," she breathed, lifting the necklace carefully from its velvet bed. "It's beautiful. I saw it in a jewelry store window during lunch and thought of you," he said softly, his voice taking on that tender quality she was beginning to recognize. "Of how incredible you've been with Emma, how naturally motherhood has come to you despite everything you've been through. I wanted you to have something that reminded you how special you are, how strong you are." Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes as she held the necklace up to catch the light. No one had ever given her jewelry before. Bobby had never been one for romantic gestures, always claiming he was saving money for their future while spending freely on himself. But this felt different. This felt like Patrick was trying to tell her something he couldn't quite put into words yet. "Will you help me put it on?" she asked softly, her voice slightly husky with emotion. Patrick's eyes darkened slightly as he nodded, carefully transferring Emma to Lucy's eager arms before moving to stand behind Naomi's chair. His fingers were gentle as they lifted her hair, sending shivers down her spine, and when he fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck, his touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "Perfect," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Absolutely perfect." That night, Naomi stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her luxurious guest suite, touching the pendant at her throat and trying to understand what was happening to her. 6 weeks ago, she'd been planning a life as a single mother, prepared to face the world alone with her daughter. Now she was living in a mansion with a man who treated her like a queen, and Emma like his own child, and every day it became harder to remember why she'd ever thought she didn't deserve this kind of happiness. A soft knock at her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Lucy or maybe one of the housekeeping staff Patrick employed. Instead, Patrick appeared in the doorway, and something about his expression made her pulse quicken. He looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him before, and he was still wearing his dress shirt from work, though he'd rolled up the sleeves and unbuttoned the top few buttons in a way that made her mouth go dry. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said quietly, stepping into the room but leaving the door open. "I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep, and I keep thinking about something Lucy said to me earlier." "What did she say?" Naomi asked, pulling her silk robe tighter around herself and trying not to notice how the soft lamplight made Patrick's eyes look like emeralds. "She said I should tell you how I feel before I lose my nerve," Patrick said, moving closer until he was standing just a few feet away from her. "She said you might be planning to leave soon, and that I'd regret it for the rest of my life if I let you go without being completely honest." Naomi's heart started beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. "Patrick, I know this is complicated," he said, his voice taking on an urgency that made her breath catch. "I know we've only known each other for 6 weeks, and I know the circumstances that brought us together weren't exactly conventional. But Naomi, I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude or some misguided hero complex." "Then what does it have to do with?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. Patrick reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "It has to do with the fact that you're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. It has to do with the way you make me want to be a better man, the way you and Emma have turned this house into a home. It has to do with the fact that I'm falling in love with you, and I can't pretend anymore that this is just about helping out." The words hung in the air between them like a promise, and Naomi felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "You can't love me," she said desperately, even as her heart soared at his confession. "You don't really know me. We're from completely different worlds, and I come with so much baggage, so many complications. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met to take care of the people you love," Patrick said firmly, his hands never leaving her face. "I know you're brave enough to face labor alone because you refuse to be anything less than the mother Emma deserves. I know you're stubborn and independent, and that you cry when you think no one is looking because you're afraid to let people see how much you need them to stay." Each word hit Naomi like a physical blow because they were true, all of them. And the fact that Patrick saw her so clearly was both terrifying and incredibly liberating. "I know you're scared," Patrick continued, his voice soft but urgent. "I know you've been hurt before, and I know you're waiting for me to disappoint you like everyone else has. But Naomi, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not Bobby, and I'm not your parents, and I'm not anyone else who made you feel like you weren't worth fighting for." "How can you be so sure?" Naomi asked, her voice breaking on the words as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Because I love you," Patrick said simply. "Because for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to want to build something permanent with someone. Because when I look at you and Emma, I see my future, and it's more beautiful than anything I ever dared to imagine for myself." Before Naomi could respond, before she could think of all the reasons why this was impossible, Patrick leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and gentle and full of all the emotions he'd just laid bare, and it tasted like hope and promises and the kind of love she'd stopped believing in. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Naomi looked up into Patrick's eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there. Love, yes, but also fear and vulnerability and the desperate need to trust in something good. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I've been trying so hard not to, but Patrick, I love you too." The smile that spread across Patrick's face was like watching the sun rise, bright and warm and full of infinite possibility. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Naomi let herself fall into the sensation of being loved completely, unconditionally, by someone who saw all her flaws and chose her anyway. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone shows up exactly when you need them most? Share your story in the comments below. This community loves hearing how love finds us in unexpected ways. But even as she melted into his arms, even as she let herself believe in the fairy tale they were creating together, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that this was too good to last. That soon enough, something would happen to remind them both of all the reasons why this could never work. She was so lost in Patrick's kiss, so overwhelmed by the feeling of finally being home, that she didn't notice the car pulling up the driveway outside. She didn't see the figure approaching the front door with determined steps and a lawyer's briefcase clutched in his hand. She had no idea that Bobby Edwards had finally decided he wanted his daughter back, and that he was prepared to do whatever it took to get her, along with a substantial piece of Patrick's fortune. The fairy tale was about to become a nightmare, and all of Naomi's greatest fears were about to be put to the ultimate test. Chapter 4. The doorbell rang at 7:15 the next morning, shrill and insistent in a way that shattered the peaceful quiet of the Pacific Heights mansion. Naomi was in the nursery feeding Emma, still glowing from the memory of Patrick's confession and the taste of his kiss on her lips. For the first time in her adult life, she'd fallen asleep feeling completely safe, completely cherished, wrapped in the promise of a love that felt destined. She heard Patrick's footsteps on the marble stairs, heard the heavy front door open, and then voices. Patrick's controlled and careful, and another voice that made her blood turn to ice in her veins and nearly caused her to drop Emma's bottle. Bobby Edwards. The man who'd abandoned her in labor was standing in Patrick's foyer, and from the aggressive tone of his voice carrying up the stairs, he wasn't here to apologize. "Where is she?" Bobby was saying, his voice sharp with the kind of entitlement she remembered too well. "Where's Naomi, and where's my daughter?" Naomi's hands began to shake so badly she had to set Emma's bottle on the side table. She'd known this day might come eventually, but she'd pushed the possibility to the back of her mind, choosing to live in the bubble of safety and happiness Patrick had created for them. Now, reality was crashing down like a sledgehammer. "Your daughter?" Patrick's voice was deadly quiet, carrying the kind of controlled fury that was far more intimidating than shouting. "The daughter you abandoned when Naomi was in labor? The daughter whose birth certificate lists no father because you couldn't be bothered to show up for the most important day of her life?" "That's about to change," Bobby said, and Naomi could hear the smug confidence in his voice that she remembered so well from their 2 years together. "My lawyer says I have rights, paternal rights, and I'm here to exercise them." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She carefully set Emma in her crib and crept to the top of the stairs where she could see into the foyer below through the elegant banister. Bobby looked exactly the same, handsome in a flashy, superficial way, with the kind of cheap charm that had fooled her for far too long. But standing next to Patrick in the marble entryway, he looked diminished somehow, smaller, less substantial, like a shadow trying to compete with sunlight. "You have no rights to Emma," Patrick said firmly, his posture radiating barely contained violence. "You forfeited those when you sent a cowardly text message instead of showing up to support the mother of your child." "Says who?" Bobby sneered, his voice taking on the bullying tone she'd learned to fear. "Says you? Who the hell are you anyway? Naomi's latest boyfriend? Her sugar daddy? Some rich guy playing house with a desperate single mother?" The crude words made Naomi flinch, but Patrick's expression didn't change. If anything, he became even more still, more controlled, and somehow that was infinitely more intimidating than any show of anger would have been. "I'm the man who was there when Emma was born," Patrick said quietly, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his fury grew. "I'm the man who held Naomi's hand through 18 hours of labor while you were God knows where. I'm the man who's been getting up for 3 a.m. feedings and changing diapers and singing lullabies while you were... Where exactly have you been these past 6 weeks, Bobby?" Bobby's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "That's not the point. The point is, Emma is my biological daughter, and I have legal rights that supersede whatever arrangement you people have going here. My lawyer says we can file for custody, demand paternity testing, seek child support payments. This whole setup you've got, it's not natural. It's not healthy for a child to be living with strangers." "What's not healthy?" Patrick said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that made the hair on Naomi's arms stand up. "Is a father who abandons his child and then shows up weeks later trying to disrupt the only stability she's ever known. What's not healthy is a man who sees dollar signs instead of a precious little girl who deserves unconditional love." "Don't lecture me about what's healthy," Bobby snapped. "I've been doing research on this situation. Naomi shacking up with some billionaire she just met, playing happy family with my kid. Any judge is going to have serious questions about her judgment and fitness as a mother." The threat hit Naomi like a physical blow. The implication was clear. Bobby wasn't just threatening to take Emma away from Patrick, he was threatening to take Emma away from her entirely. "I want to see her," Bobby demanded, his voice taking on that wheedling, manipulative tone she remembered too well. "I want to see my daughter, and I want to talk to Naomi, right now." Naomi closed her eyes, knowing she couldn't hide upstairs forever. Emma was beginning to stir in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be demanding attention soon, and she couldn't let her daughter sense the fear and panic radiating from her. Taking a deep breath and drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Naomi stood and walked down the curved staircase, every step measured and deliberate. Both men looked up as she appeared, and the contrast in their expressions was stark. Patrick's face was full of protective concern and barely restrained fury, while Bobby's was calculating, already, trying to figure out how to use her appearance to his advantage. "Hello, Bobby," Naomi said quietly, proud that her voice didn't shake despite the terror clawing at her chest. Naomi. Bobby's expression shifted slightly, slipping into the charming mask she remembered from their early dating days. "You look good. Better than good. You look incredible. Motherhood suits you." "What do you want?" Naomi asked bluntly, not interested in his attempts at manipulation or small talk. "I want to meet my daughter," Bobby said, his eyes fixed on the staircase behind her as if he could see through the walls to where Emma was sleeping. "I want to be part of her life. I made a mistake, Naomi. I was scared and I panicked and I ran. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right. I want to be the father Emma deserves." The words might have sounded sincere to someone who didn't know Bobby as intimately as Naomi did. But she could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he was taking in Patrick's expensive suit and the marble floors and crystal chandelier, the way his gaze lingered on the designer dress Lucy had bought her and the gold necklace Patrick had given her just yesterday. "You didn't make a mistake," Naomi said firmly, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You made a choice. You chose to leave when things got difficult, when I needed you most. And now you want to come back because... Why? What's really changed, Bobby?" Bobby's charming mask slipped slightly, revealing the calculating opportunist underneath. "I heard you were living here. With him." He jerked his head toward Patrick with obvious disdain. "People are talking, Naomi. Saying you moved in with some tech billionaire right after Emma was born. That doesn't look good for a custody hearing, you know. Judges frown on mothers who prioritize financial security over stability for their children." There it was. The real reason Bobby was here. Not because he suddenly wanted to be a father, but because he'd realized there might be money involved. The Bobby she'd known had always been motivated by what he could get, always looking for the angle that would benefit him most, and apparently, fatherhood was just another opportunity to cash in. "Are you threatening me?" Naomi asked, her voice deadly quiet as Patrick moved closer to her side. "I'm stating facts," Bobby said with a shrug that was supposed to look casual but came across as cruel. "A judge is going to look at this situation, you living with a man you barely know, taking his money, letting him play daddy to your baby, and they're going to have serious questions about your priorities and judgment." Patrick stepped forward, his body language radiating barely controlled violence, and for a moment Naomi thought he might actually hit Bobby. "Get out," he said quietly, but there was steel beneath the words that made Bobby take an involuntary step backward. "Excuse me?" Bobby laughed, but there was nervousness behind it now as he seemed to truly register Patrick's size and obvious physical strength for the first time. "This is between me and Naomi. You don't get a say in this." "The hell I don't," Patrick said, his Irish accent thick with anger. "This is my home. Emma is my family, and if you think I'm going to let you waltz in here and threaten the people I love, you're delusional." "Your family?" Bobby scoffed, but his voice cracked slightly. "You've known them for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I'm Emma's father. I have legal rights that trump whatever fantasy you people are living." "No," Patrick said with absolute conviction. "A father is someone who shows up. A father is someone who holds his daughter when she cries and gets up in the middle of the night when she's hungry. A father is someone who loves her mother unconditionally and makes sure they both feel safe and protected every single day. You're just a sperm donor who's finally realized there might be something profitable in this for him." The brutal truth of Patrick's words hit Bobby like a physical blow, and for a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked completely. Naomi saw the flash of rage in his eyes, the kind of barely controlled anger that had always scared her when they'd been together, the reason she'd never quite felt safe, even in their good moments. "We'll see what a judge thinks about that," Bobby snarled, his handsome face twisting with ugly fury. "We'll see how your little fairy tale holds up in court when I tell them about how you swooped in to take advantage of a vulnerable new mother. When I tell them about all the ways this situation could be harmful to an innocent child. And we'll see how your abandonment and 6-week absence plays in court," Patrick shot back without missing a beat. "We'll see how the judge reacts when they hear about the text message you sent while Naomi was in labor. When they see the hospital records showing that I was there for Emma's birth while you were nowhere to be found. When they hear from the medical staff about how you left a woman to face childbirth completely alone." Bobby's face was red with fury now, but before he could respond, Emma's cries began echoing down from the nursery upstairs. The sound cut through the tension in the room like a knife, and Naomi's maternal instincts immediately took over, everything else fading in importance. "She needs me," Naomi said quietly, starting toward the stairs. "Let me hold her," Bobby said suddenly, reaching out as if to stop her. "I'm her father. I have a right to hold my own daughter." "No," Naomi said firmly, stepping back and feeling Patrick's solid presence immediately behind her. "You lost that right when you abandoned us. You lost it when you chose your own comfort over Emma's well-being." "Naomi, be reasonable," Bobby said, his voice taking on the wheedling, manipulative tone she remembered and hated. "I know I messed up, but I'm here now. I want to be part of Emma's life. Don't let your feelings about our relationship affect what you think is best for our daughter." The manipulation was so blatant, so utterly typical of the Bobby she'd known, that Naomi felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This man had never loved her, not really. He'd never wanted Emma, and he sure as hell didn't want to be a father now. He wanted money, leverage, a way to insert himself into a situation that might benefit him financially. "What's best for Emma," Naomi said clearly, her voice ringing with conviction, "is to be surrounded by people who love her unconditionally, people who were there from the beginning and who will be there for the rest of her life, no matter what. You've already proven that's not you, Bobby." Bobby's expression turned ugly, all pretense of charm and concern finally dropping away. "Fine, have it your way. But this isn't over, Naomi, not by a long shot. I'll be back, and next time I'll have legal papers. We'll see how long your sugar daddy sticks around when things get really complicated and expensive." "His name is Patrick," Naomi said with quiet dignity, feeling strength flow through her as she said it. "And he'll stick around because that's what real love looks like. That's what commitment actually means. Being there when things get difficult, not running away the moment you're needed most." Bobby sneered, but he was already backing toward the front door, clearly eager to escape, before Patrick decided to physically remove him. "We'll see about that. My lawyer will be in touch. Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts." After the heavy door slammed shut behind him, the mansion felt poisoned by his presence. Emma's cries were getting more insistent upstairs, upset by the tension she'd sensed even from her nursery, and Naomi found herself shaking with a combination of rage, terror, and protective fury she'd never experienced before. "He can't take her, can he?" she asked Patrick, her voice small and frightened despite her brave words to Bobby. "He can't actually get custody after abandoning us like that?" Patrick's face was grim as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest while Emma continued crying upstairs. "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty both terrifying and somehow comforting. "But I'm calling my attorney right now, and we're going to find out exactly what we're dealing with. We're going to fight this with everything we have." "Patrick," Naomi said, looking up at him with eyes full of fear and guilt. "Maybe he's right. Maybe this situation isn't good for Emma. Maybe I should take her and leave before this gets worse and destroys your life, too." "Don't you dare," Patrick said fiercely, cupping her face in his hands with desperate intensity. "Don't you dare let that coward make you doubt what we have. We're a family, Naomi, you, me, and Emma, and I'll be damned if I let some opportunistic bastard break us apart because he smells money." Sometimes love faces its biggest tests not from within, but from the outside world trying to tear it apart. Have you ever had to fight for love that others didn't understand? Let us know in the comments. As if to emphasize Patrick's words, Emma's cries began to quiet slightly as the tension in the house started to dissipate. Even from upstairs, she seemed to sense that the immediate threat had passed, that the people who loved her were still there and still fighting for her. "We'll fight this," Patrick said quietly, his forehead pressed against Naomi's. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, however much it costs, we'll fight this together. Bobby Edwards doesn't get to destroy our family just because he's finally realized that loving someone means you might be able to profit from them." But even as Patrick spoke those brave words, even as Naomi tried to draw strength from his conviction and love, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Bobby had looked too confident, too sure of himself. He clearly had a plan that went beyond simple parental rights, and experience had taught her that Bobby's plans usually involved maximum damage to anyone who got in his way. The fairy tale was under attack, and despite Patrick's promises and declarations of love, Naomi had to wonder if their relationship was strong enough to survive what was coming. She'd survived abandonment before, but this time she had so much more to lose. This time, she had a family worth fighting for. The question was whether love would really be enough to protect what they'd built, or if the harsh realities of custody battles and legal manipulation would prove stronger than the magic they'd found in each other's arms. As they stood there in the marble foyer of Patrick's mansion, holding each other while Emma's cries echoed from above, both of them knew their lives had just changed forever. The battle for their family was about to begin, and only one side could win. But they also knew something Bobby Edwards had never understood, and never would. When you're fighting for real love, when you're protecting the people who matter more than your own life, you don't give up. You fight with everything you have and you pray that love really is stronger than greed. Chapter 5. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood in the pediatric emergency room at San Francisco General, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the medical team work over Emma's tiny form. The baby had spiked a fever that morning, and when it had climbed to 103.8 degrees despite infant acetaminophen, Patrick had driven them to the hospital with controlled urgency, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his sedan. "It's most likely just a respiratory virus," Dr. Chloe Davies had assured them when she'd arrived to take over Emma's care, her familiar presence a comfort in the sterile chaos of the emergency room. Babies Emma's age can't regulate their temperature the way older children can, so what seems terrifying to parents is often very manageable medically. But we'll run a full panel of tests to rule out anything more serious. Now, Emma was in the pediatric ICU, looking impossibly small and fragile under the harsh hospital lights, connected to monitors and an IV line that seemed enormous against her tiny arm. Naomi hadn't left her side in 8 hours, and Patrick had been right there with her, both of them taking turns holding Emma's delicate hand and whispering reassurances they weren't sure she could hear through her fevered sleep. "The blood work came back clean," Javier Morales said as he approached their chairs beside Emma's isolette, his familiar warm smile providing an anchor of normalcy in their fear. The labor nurse had become a friend over the past 9 weeks, checking in on them regularly and celebrating Emma's milestones like a proud uncle. "White count is normal, cultures are negative so far, and her temperature is already starting to respond to the antibiotics. Dr. Davies thinks she'll be ready to go home tomorrow afternoon." Naomi sagged with relief, but Patrick remained rigid beside her, his hands trembling slightly as he reached through the isolette's portholes to stroke Emma's cheek. She'd noticed the way his breathing had become shallow and labored when they'd first arrived at the hospital, the stark fear in his eyes that went beyond normal parental concern. "Patrick," she said softly, taking his hand and feeling how cold his skin was despite the warm room. "She's going to be okay. Javier said her fever's breaking." "I know," he said, but his voice was tight with something that sounded like barely controlled panic. "I know she is. It's just hospitals, sick children, being helpless while someone you love suffers. It brings back memories I'd rather keep buried." He didn't finish the thought, but Naomi understood. Patrick had been 7 years old when his mother had abandoned him, and he'd spent years in the foster system where medical attention had been sporadic at best. The sight of Emma hooked up to machines, vulnerable and tiny and beyond his ability to protect, was triggering memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. "Why don't you get some air?" Naomi suggested gently, squeezing his hand. "Take a walk. Call your office, grab some real coffee. Emma and I will be right here when you get back." Patrick started to protest, his protective instincts warring with his obvious claustrophobia, but another wave of what looked like a panic attack passed over his features. "Just for a few minutes," he said reluctantly, pressing a gentle kiss to Emma's forehead through the isolette. "I'll be right back, little princess. Daddy's not going anywhere." After he left, Naomi settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Emma's isolette and tried to process everything that had happened in the 3 weeks since Bobby's threatening visit. The legal papers had arrived exactly when he'd promised: custody petition, demand for paternity testing, motions for child support, and shared custody. Patrick's lawyers were confident they could fight it, but the stress was taking its toll on all of them. "Your daddy's scared," Naomi whispered to Emma, whose fever had indeed broken and who was now sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and strong. "He loves you so much it terrifies him. He's not used to having people to lose, people who matter more than his own life." "Talking to yourself again?" Naomi looked up to see Jasmine Clark standing in the doorway, looking tired and worried, but determined. Her sister had flown in from Portland the moment she'd heard about Emma's hospitalization, dropping everything to be there when her family needed her. "Jazz," Naomi said with relief, standing to hug her sister tightly, "I didn't think you'd make it until tonight." "I caught an earlier flight," Jasmine said, immediately moving to peer into the isolette at Emma's sleeping form. "How is she?" "Really?" "Better. The doctors think it was just a virus that got away from her, but it scared us to death." Naomi settled back into her chair, suddenly feeling exhausted now that reinforcements had arrived. Jasmine studied her sister's face with the careful attention of someone who'd been worried for weeks. "And how are you?" "Really? You look like you haven't slept in days." Naomi knew her sister was referring to more than just Emma's illness. Jasmine had been skeptical about Patrick from the beginning, worried that Naomi was falling for someone she barely knew out of gratitude and desperation. The legal battle with Bobby had only intensified those concerns. "I'm managing," Naomi said, which was only partially true. "Patrick's been incredible through all of this. He loves Emma like she's his own daughter, and he's hired the best lawyers money can buy to fight Bobby's custody claim." "And the stress of that fight?" Jasmine asked gently. "How is that affecting your relationship with Patrick?" Naomi was quiet for a moment, watching Emma's monitors beep steadily. The truth was, the legal battle was straining their still new relationship in ways she hadn't expected. Patrick had thrown himself into fighting Bobby with single-minded determination, hiring private investigators to dig into Bobby's background, working 16-hour days to ensure he could afford the best legal representation, treating the custody battle like a corporate acquisition he was determined to win. "He's trying to protect us," Naomi said finally, "but sometimes I feel like he's fighting this battle for me instead of with me, like he thinks he can solve everything with enough money and enough lawyers." "And what do you think?" Jasmine asked. Before Naomi could answer, she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway and turned to see Patrick returning, his color better, but his eyes still tight with residual anxiety. He stopped short when he saw Jasmine, and Naomi could see him mentally shifting gears, putting on the charming public persona she'd learned to recognize. "You must be Jasmine," he said, extending a hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Patrick O'Connor. I've heard so much about you." "Mr. O'Connor," Jasmine said, shaking his hand while studying his face with sharp eyes. "Thank you for taking such good care of my sister and niece." "It's not something you need to thank me for," Patrick said, moving immediately to check Emma's monitors with the kind of focused attention that spoke of hours spent learning to read them. "They're my family." There was something in the way he said it, with such fierce possessiveness, that made Jasmine's eyebrows rise slightly. The conversation that followed was polite but tense, with Patrick clearly seeing Jasmine as another threat to his carefully constructed protective bubble around Naomi and Emma. I should let you two have some privacy, Jasmine said after a few minutes of stilted conversation. But Naomi, we should talk later. Really talk. After her sister left, Patrick settled into the chair beside Naomi, reaching through the isolette to stroke Emma's tiny hand. Your sister doesn't trust me, he said quietly. She's protective, Naomi said diplomatically. She's watched me get hurt before, and she's worried about how fast everything is moving. Are you? Patrick asked, his green eyes serious as they met hers. Worried that we're moving too fast? Naomi considered the question as Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. Was it too fast? By any conventional measure, absolutely. But nothing about their relationship had been conventional from the moment Patrick had walked into that hospital room 9 weeks ago. I don't know if it's about moving too fast, she said honestly. I think I'm more worried about what happens if we can't win against Bobby. What happens to us if the worst-case scenario comes true? Patrick was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in the gesture that had become second nature to both of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I've been thinking about what Bobby said, he admitted, about how this might look to a judge, about whether my presence in your life could actually hurt your chances of keeping Emma. Naomi's stomach clenched with sudden fear. Are you saying you want to step back? That you want to leave? God, no, Patrick said immediately, his grip on her hand tightening almost painfully. I'm saying maybe we need to make this official before some judge decides our relationship is too unconventional for Emma's best interests. Maybe we need to stop letting other people define what our family looks like. What do you mean? Patrick turned in his chair to face her fully, his free hand moving to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. Marry me, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Marry me. Let me adopt Emma officially, and let's build the life we both want without worrying about what anyone else thinks is proper or appropriate. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Patrick. I know the timing isn't ideal, he said quickly, as if he was afraid she'd refuse if he gave her time to think. I know it's not the romantic proposal you probably dreamed of, with us sitting in a pediatric ICU worried about our daughter's health. But Naomi, I love you. I love Emma. I want to be her father in every way that matters, legally and emotionally, and I want to be your husband. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life and know that no one can ever take you away from me. Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks as she looked at this man who'd changed everything for her. 9 weeks ago, she'd been alone and abandoned, facing an uncertain future as a single mother. Now she was being offered everything she'd ever wanted: love, security, a father for Emma who would never leave them, and legal protection that Bobby's threats couldn't touch. Yes, she whispered, the word coming out on a sob of relief and joy. Yes, Patrick. Yes to all of it. The smile that spread across Patrick's face was brilliant and transformative, and he leaned forward to kiss her with all the passion and promise of their future together. When they broke apart, both of them were crying, and Emma was watching them with those dark eyes that seemed to understand that something monumentally important had just happened. I'll call my lawyer first thing tomorrow, Patrick said, pressing his forehead against Naomi's. We'll make this official before Bobby can cause any more damage to our family. What if the court doesn't approve the adoption? Naomi asked, voicing her deepest fear. Then we'll fight, Patrick said with quiet determination that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. We'll fight until there's no fight left, and we'll win because what we have is real. Because Emma belongs with people who love her unconditionally, not with someone who sees her as a commodity to be leveraged. 3 months later, Naomi stood in the courthouse chapel of San Francisco City Hall, wearing a simple but elegant ivory dress that Lucy had helped her choose. Emma was in her arms, now 4 months old and healthy, dressed in a tiny christening gown that had belonged to Patrick's adoptive grandmother, and for the first time in her life, Naomi felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The legal battles had been intense, but mercifully brief. Bobby's case had fallen apart spectacularly when Patrick's private investigators had uncovered evidence of his gambling debts. his history of avoiding financial responsibility, and most damning, recordings of him bragging to friends about how he planned to cash in on his baby mama's rich boyfriend. The judge had been particularly unimpressed by Bobby's transparent opportunism, especially when contrasted with the mountain of evidence showing Patrick's devotion to Emma's well-being. The adoption papers had been finalized just last week, making Patrick Emma's legal father in every sense that mattered. And now, as they prepared to take their vows, Naomi felt like her fairy tale was finally complete. "You look beautiful," Patrick murmured as the officiant prepared to begin the ceremony. "Both of you, my beautiful girls." "You clean up pretty well yourself," Naomi said with a smile, admiring her soon-to-be husband in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit that brought out the green in his eyes. The ceremony was small and intimate, just Lucy, Jasmine, Dr. Davies, Javier, and Patrick's mother Beatrice, who had flown in from Dublin for the occasion. To Naomi's surprise and relief, Beatrice had embraced her warmly, welcoming her to the O'Connor family with genuine affection. "Patrick has never looked happier," Beatrice had said the night before, watching her son playing with Emma in the mansion's garden. "You've given him something I was never able to give him after his father died. A real family, a sense of belonging. Thank you for that, love." As they exchanged vows, Patrick's voice was strong and sure, as he promised to love, honor, and protect both Naomi and Emma for the rest of his life. When it was Naomi's turn, she looked into those green eyes that had been her anchor through everything and spoke from her heart. "9 weeks ago I thought I was going to face the world alone," she said, her voice clear despite the tears in her eyes. "You walked into my life at my lowest moment and showed me what it means to be truly loved, truly chosen. You've been Emma's father from her first breath, and you've been my partner through every challenge we've faced. I promise to love you, trust you, and build a beautiful life with you, no matter what obstacles we encounter." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of all the love and promise of their future together. Emma chose that perfect moment to let out a happy gurgle, as if she approved of the proceedings, making everyone in the chapel laugh with joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant said with a warm smile, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. O'Connor and their daughter Emma." Their daughter, not Patrick's stepdaughter, not Naomi's daughter, from a previous relationship, but their daughter, legally and emotionally and completely. The words filled Naomi's heart to overflowing. Later, at the small reception Lucy had organized at the Pacific Heights mansion, Naomi found herself standing on the terrace overlooking San Francisco Bay, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she'd never seen anything more beautiful in her life. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. O'Connor," Patrick said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around them both, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Just thinking about how different my life is now," Naomi said, leaning back against his chest and marveling at how perfectly she fit there. 10 months ago, I never could have imagined this. Being married to you, living in this beautiful house, feeling so completely safe and loved and protected." "Do you ever regret it?" Patrick asked quietly, his arms tightening around her. "Trusting someone you barely knew, letting me into your life when you had every reason to be suspicious?" Naomi turned in his arms, studying his face in the golden light of sunset. "Never," she said firmly. "Sometimes the universe puts people in our path exactly when we need them most. Sometimes love doesn't follow a timeline or make logical sense to other people. Sometimes it just is, and you have to be brave enough to reach for it with both hands." Patrick's smile was soft and wondering, as if he still couldn't quite believe this was his life. "I love you, Mrs. O'Connor," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead in the gesture that had become their signature. "Both of you, more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "And we love you," Naomi replied, then looked down at Emma's sleeping face. "Don't we, baby girl?" "We love Daddy so much." As if she could hear them in her sleep, Emma's tiny hand reached out and grasped Patrick's finger with that surprising strength that newborns possessed. And standing there on the terrace of their home, surrounded by the golden light of their new beginning, The three of them were exactly what they'd always been meant to be. A family. Complete, unshakable, and bound together by the kind of love that could overcome any obstacle the world threw at them. The fairy tale that had begun in a sterile hospital room with an abandoned woman in labor and a man who couldn't walk away had become something real and lasting and beautiful. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above San Francisco Bay, Patrick O'Connor kissed his wife's forehead once more and whispered the words that had started it all. "You're mine now, Queen. Both of you. Forever and always." And for the first time in her life, Naomi Clark O'Connor knew with absolute certainty that someone would never, ever leave her again. That she was loved completely, cherished utterly, and that her daughter would grow up knowing what it felt like to be wanted and protected and adored by two parents who had chosen each other and chosen her. Sometimes the universe really did send exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. Sometimes love really was enough to overcome everything else, and sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, fairy tales actually did come true. What did you think of Patrick and Naomi's journey from strangers to family? Drop a heart emoji if this story touched you. Have you ever experienced love that felt destined? Share your story below. Don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's new story and hit that notification bell, because love stories like this remind us all that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them.